Hello, I'm Junho Jung. I'll be your guide through medical history in modern Korea. Life, death, sickness, and health resonate with societies across time and space. In modern society, the body has become a direct objective and means of governance, beyond the issues of illness and health. Hence, understanding medicine, which has the exclusive power to intervene the individual bodies in modern society, is the key to understanding the society. In this course, we will look at the historical development of Korean medicine, from the introduction of Western medicine to Korean medicine now, and analyze the process of interactions by the state, medical professionals, and us as citizens and patients. Through this course, we will look beyond the medical landscape and examine the possibilities, conflicts, limitations, and challenges that Korean society has today.
Why medicine?
Before we begin, it is essential to review why medicine matters. Why look at medicine in understanding modern Korea? As I mentioned in the intro, everyone gets sick, ages, and dies, or seek health and better life. We, and any society that ever existed, are all bound by the same biological conditions of human being. Beyond these obvious reasons, medicine has a unique place in modern Korean society. Modern Korea has undergone enormous changes. The opening of the port in 1876 and the introduction of the Western culture. The Japanese annexation and colonization in 1910, the end of World War II and liberation in 1945, the military coup and military dictatorship in 1961, the democratization movement in 1987, and the dawn of the democratic era, and globalization and entry into the high-income nations in 2000s. While the transformation from one of the world's poorest to the high-income nations often portrayed as a success story, it has side effects. Moreover, the country's turbulence from colony to post-colonial nations and Cold War frontline have mirrored the international geopolitics of each era. Against this backdrop, Korean medicine, as it has grown, rebuilt, and transformed, is perhaps the best window into the successive facets of these changes. First, at the level of the medical professions. They were a relatively well-established profession from the colonial period. Trained during the colonial period and influenced by the US after liberation to form the basis of what is now known as Korean medicine. Whereas other professions during the colonial period were largely filled by Japanese, the field of medicine was quite open to Koreans, resulting in a well-established group of professionals that spanned the colonial and post-colonial periods. Thanks to these characteristics, we can see through medicine what the colonial legacy was and how post-liberation Korea tried to overcome or capitalize on it. On the other hand, it is also tell us how these colonial legacies and post-liberation US influences mix to form the Korean society we know today. Moreover, medicine became an important part of Korean life cycle. Today, South Korea has the highest per capita growth in medical spending among OECD countries, as well as the per capita utilization of medical facilities, which shows the quantitative growth of medicine and the high accessibility to medicine. This is remarkable growth compared to the last century, when more than half of the rural area were doctorless. At the same time, this quantitative growth was made possible through coercive mass mobilization during military dictatorship. Of course, there is no denying that there was active participation of the people in the quest for a better, cleaner, and healthier life. Nevertheless, the state-driven mobilization has changed the very fabric of society, penetrating from institution to the daily lives of individuals through the medicine. Medicine is therefore not only a window into the growth of Korean society, but also a tool to understanding the key elements that have shaped its daily life. Finally, medicine shows diversity of Korean society. Even now, there are different lineages of medicine coexisting in Korea. There is what we call modern medicine, which is centered around Western medicine, came to Korea in after the opening of the port in 1876. Then there is Hanbang or Hanyak, which has long tradition in Korean peninsula, and then various folk medicines. These pluralistic entities within medicine can work together to create synergy, but they can also be in conflict and dispute. And this diversity creates a dynamic that is unique to Korea. In this course, we will examine Korean medicine from modernization to contemporary, with the aim of exploring how contemporary Korean medicine has been shaped in continuity or disconnection with the past, and in the context of global changes beyond Korea. In doing so, we hope to understand not only the unfolding of the science, technology, knowledge, and the practices of medicine, but also to gain different perspective on Korea's modern and contemporary history. To do this, let's take a moment to look at what Korean medicine looked like before the liberation of Korea in 1945.
Medicine in open port.
There are different branches of medicine in modern Korea. If we divide it into main branches, that will be Western medicine and Korean traditional medicine. Of these, Western medicine was introduced through several routes. 1. Adopted by then Joseon or Korean Empire. 2. Import through Japan as a tool of imperialist expansion. And 3. Introduction by Western missionaries. Each of these routes became main pillars that shaped modern Korean medicine. The introduction of Western medicine by the Korean Empire was self-initiated modernization effort. The work of missionary doctors indeed improved the access to medicine for local communities. The spread of Western medicine by Japan was colonization effort, but its impact was greatest at the institution level, and its material and human resources would have an impact well into the post-liberation period. Here, we will briefly examine the development of Korean medicine from the opening of the port in 1876 to liberation in 1945, focusing on the impact of its legacy on the early formation of modern Korean medicine since liberation. With the opening of the port in 1876, Korea began the rapid integration into the international communities. The Japanese imported vaccination method effectively prevented smallpox, a major endemic disease on the Korean peninsula that was responsible for high infant mortality rates. Faced with competition from the imperial powers after the opening of the port, Korean government believed that these modern tools of the West, namely Western medicine, would serve an important driver to nurture the strength of the nation. With the 1884 reform policy, the medical system underwent a radical transformation. The traditional medical system that has been in place through the Joseon dynasty was dismantled, and the new administrative organization, the Korea Sanitation Bureau emerged. This was a prelude to an era of hygiene on the Korea, which also saw the emergence of sanitary police to enforce hygiene surveillance. The cholera epidemic of 1895 was a major social and biological factor that spurred these reform measures. In response to the nationwide cholera epidemic, a new set of hygiene law emerged, including disinfection and the establishment of quarantine hospitals to isolate patients. On the other hand, the establishment of the national medical schools in 1899 provided an opportunity for the state to produce professionals trained in Western medicine. Korea embraced new medicine and sought to respond to the crisis that emerged in the wake of globalization. However, these proactive efforts were short-lived. Under a 1905 treaty with Japan, Korea was stripped of its diplomatic rights and became a Japanese protectorate. Medicine was an important tool in the expansion of imperialism. Medical knowledge was essential not only to protect the health of its own citizens in the colonies, but also to prevent large-scale social disruption, such as epidemics, for the stability of its rules. Even before Korea was fully colonized by Japan in 1910, the medical system was systematically reshaped to serve Japanese interests. Western-style hospitals, state-run medical schools, and other institutions that has been established by the Koreans were merged into Japanese-governed medical institutions. From then until 1945, Japan implanted a Western-style sanitation and medical system in Korea through a number of institutions. While these institutions may seem more modern at first glance, they were underneath a dual structure that divided Japan and Koreans. The national hospital, which were established in each region to show benevolence of Japanese empire, primarily served the Japanese population only. In contrast, Korean access to medicine remained low. In 1929, the average daily wage of the worker was between 1 and 2.5 won. But treatment at the governmental hospital cost 700 won for an outpatient visit and 2,000 won for admission. In addition, coercive epidemic prevention activities led by sanitary police turned medicine into a tool of repression and domination. This is best illustrated by the fact that in colonial Korea, the Sanitary Bureau, which was in charge of medical and sanitary affairs, was under the direction of Department of Police. In the event of cholera outbreak, for example, the police could force doctors to visit every house in the neighborhood to investigate the infection. People were coerced to expose every inch of their bodies to the doctor, who burst into their house accompanied by the blade-wielding police officers. If they are found to be infected or carriers, the police were authorized to shut down their homes or even traffics in the area, all in the name of preventing epidemics and sanitation. Ultimately, medical knowledge and the technology during this period was used as a tool to consolidate Korean control and increase intervention in everyday life by colonial power. The coercive use of medicine, particularly by the sanitary police, would leave a lasting mark on Korea's epidemic control policies even after liberation. Meanwhile, following the signing of an agreement with the United States in 1882, missionary doctors began to be dispatched in 1884. At the time, Korea had officially banned Christianity. And this prohibition on the religious activities led missionaries to focus on medicine and education, which seemed relatively neutral. And at the same time, close to the daily lives of the people. In particular, a missionary's successful surgical treatment on the high-ranking governmental officials who had been severely wounded in an assassination attempt in 1884, deeply impressed the Korean government with the capabilities of Western medicine. And missionaries became deeply involved in the Korean government's own initiative for adoption of Western medicine. At the same time, the private medical institutions founded by missionaries became another pillar of Korean medical education. As mentioned earlier, Korean traditional medicine has been an important part of people's everyday life. The Japanese Empire claimed to have modernized Korean medicine after colonization, but in reality, only a few people had access to this. Most people's contact with modern medicine was through coercive hygiene measures, and general medical access was through traditional medicine or folk medicine. However, the position of traditional medicine in Korea changed dramatically after Japanese colonization. In contrast to Korea's concerted effort to introduce Western medicine, Japan only recognized Western medicine as a legitimate medical science. The Governor General tried to exclude traditional medicine by licensing only active practitioners and not issuing new licenses. Yet, there was practical limitation to inhibit traditional medicine entirely, as this was widely practiced by the majority of the population. It was also unrealistic to build a medical system that completely excludes traditional medicine when there was an absolute shortage of doctors and hospitals. As a result, traditional medicine was institutionally downgraded but remained a major part of Korean medicine.
Medical knowledge and imperialism.
As a colony, the Korean peninsula was also a testing ground for newly emerging medical techniques. Take lung flukes, for example, which was endemic in Korea and spread by eating freshwater snails or crayfish. It parasitizes primarily in the lungs, causing symptoms such as coughing blood and weakness, and even be fatal. The coughing blood made it difficult to distinguish from tuberculosis, one of the major infectious diseases of the time, and it was also a major focus of interest to Japanese researchers because it deprives labor force. In 1916, the Governor General's office created a new endemic disease research organization to study lung fluke. The problem was that there was no drug that was effective. So the method used was to mass mobilize people in an endemic area to catch the vectors, freshwater snails and crayfish. This was expensive and time-consuming. And it didn't work for long. But then a drug called emetin was discovered. In the laboratory, it's shown to be effective against lung fluke. It was not yet clear how it could be applied to people in the field or whether it was safe. In March 1927, the governmental general gave it to 100 people in Korea. But about half of them developed symptoms of drug poisoning, and 12 people across the country died suddenly. The surviving families were outraged and demanded the truth. But police department announced that the death was caused by the cold that turned into pneumonia due to the sudden drop in temperature. They tried to settle the case with small compensation, but the bereaved families attacked the police station. They asked a group of Korean doctors to investigate the truth. They found patients were administered up to 2 to 3 grams of emetin, when the maximum dose was less than 1 gram per dose. Patients were given higher doses, directed by Governor General's office, in order to find the optimal dose and safety of emetin, regardless patient safety. In contrast, the Japanese mainland had rarely used emetin and had mainly used vector control methods. In other words, they knew of the dangers of the emetin, but used colonial subjects as tools for their medical knowledge. Another example is the cholera vaccine. In the 19th and early 20th century, cholera was the major global infectious disease. Through imperialism and internationalization, cholera spread across the globe. Its effective control became a test of an empire's ability to govern. And medical knowledge and technology were essential to manage it. During the colonial period, cholera repeatedly ravaged Korea, with the biggest epidemic occurring between 1919 and 1920. The fundamental solution to prevent waterborne diseases like cholera would be to improve infrastructure, such as better water and sewage systems. However, such large-scale investments were not made on a colonial Korea, which was set up for the economic exploitation. Instead, one-off technologies such as vaccine were widely used because they were cost-effective and could stop epidemic in the short term. In a cholera outbreak hit Korea in 1919, the governor ordered mass vaccination. Combined with the coercive sanitary police, this presented the Japanese government with an unprecedented opportunity. While such large-scale vaccination has been carried out on the Japanese mainland, it was impossible to track the individuals who has been vaccinated there, as that would violate individual rights. In colonial Korea, however, the sanitary police were able to track the individuals who has been vaccinated, allowing scientists to investigate the difference in incidences between those who have been vaccinated and those who have not. At the peak of the cholera epidemic in Korea in 1920, the cumulated number of people vaccinated reached 6 million, providing enormous data for the large-scale follow-up study of the effectiveness of the cholera vaccine made by Japan. The Japanese government later presented these results to the League of Nations. As a tool to show that the Japanese government have effectively dealt with the Korean cholera epidemic and had accumulated systematic scientific and medical knowledge in the process. In other words, the knowledge gained through the compulsory vaccination program in Korea became the basis for the arguing the legitimacy of the colonial rule in the international community.